Welcome everyone, I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick. Thanks for checking out Sarder TV, an idea-sharing platform founded by Russell Sarder, author, investor, and CEO of Netcom Learning. And joining us remotely to share some of his groundbreaking ideas is Josh Linkner. He's also a tech entrepreneur, in-demand speaker, and a New York Times best-selling author. Josh, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
So besides being a sought-after speaker, best-selling author, you've also started and sold numerous tech companies to the tune of around $200 million. No small feat, so congratulations on that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how it set you on this entrepreneurial path?
Yeah, I'm a strange guy. So I was born in the city of Detroit, not the suburbs. I'm a hardcore Detroit guy. And I actually started my career as a jazz guitarist. I put myself through school playing music, and I still play today. Ironically, not 40 years later, but the principles that I learned playing jazz around working in messy environments and creating stuff out of nothing and having to make decisions in the face of ambiguity and having to dust yourself off when you screw something up, those actually translated really well to the business world. So I've since gone on to start, build, and sell 5 companies of my own and have helped 100 other startups get off the ground.
So tell us, what are the top 3 things or ideas you think that entrepreneurs need to have in their arsenal in order to be successful? And did you use any of these? I'm sure you did.
Yeah, I've now had the chance to write 4 books on the topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is human creativity. And it's this amazing asset that all of us have, frankly, and many of us don't really fully utilize. And so for entrepreneurs, as well as just everybody else, I think the best thing we can do is tap into this dormant creative capacity. Mm-hmm. When we do that, the outcomes that we care about the most just improve, whether it's a business outcome or a family outcome or a health outcome or anything in between. But for entrepreneurs specifically, to answer your question, in the new book that I wrote, Big Little Breakthroughs, I cover the 8 core obsessions of everyday innovators. And some of those I think directly apply to entrepreneurs, if not all of them. Mm-hmm. One of them is a principle called start before you're ready, which is the notion of not waiting for direction or permission or till you have a bulletproof plan, but more about just diving in and figuring it out as you go. Another one is called use every drop of toothpaste, which is essentially a notion of being scrappy, being resourceful, doing more with less. And many startups have great ideas, they're resource constrained, but the best ones don't let that get in the way. And the other, just one I'll share quickly of these mindsets, is a principle. It's actually borrowed the phrase from a Zen proverb. It's called fall 7 times, stand 8. And it's actually the fusion, it's not just dogged persistence, it's the fusion of resilience and creativity. It's recognizing that stumbles and setbacks are a part of the process. And then it's like, what can you learn from it? And how can you take a fresh creative angle in order to get back up and carry the day?
Which leads me to my next question. So what have you learned most from a failed or not so successful venture that you've embarked upon during your career?
We don't have enough time to cover all my failures. It's funny, I've had the chance to interview, CEOs and celebrity entrepreneurs and billionaires. And one thing that's common is, yes, they've won more, but they've also failed more. And so for me, the biggest lesson is that, when we see somebody else stumble, they tried in good faith and they stumbled, we extend them compassion and care. But when we do it, when we struggle ourselves, we are ashamed and we vilify ourselves, and we're just, the chatter is so mean. And it's hard to do. I still, struggle with this too. But I think the real key here is recognizing that setbacks, again, are part of the process and trying to remove judgment. It's not good or bad, it just is. And what can you learn from it? How can you become better as a result of it? I'm not saying to aim for failure. Failure stinks. No one wants to screw something up. But when we do, which is inevitable, it's removing the judgment and extending ourselves compassion, I think, that can be very helpful.
Okay, and your latest venture, tell us a little bit about your current role here at Platypus Labs. You are co-founder, chairman, and tell us what particular things with the founding of this company did you pull out of your arsenal?
Well, again, my whole fundamental belief system for the last 40 plus years is that we as human beings have this huge superpower, really. We can't fly, we don't have x-ray vision, but we all can imagine the future and then figure out with our own creativity how to make that happen. Mm-hmm. And so I'm on this crazy mission to help everyday people become everyday innovators. So to answer your question, Platypus Labs is exactly that. It's a consulting and training and research firm, and we help organizations build an army of everyday innovators. We help them, if they have 10,000 people, what a shame if only 5 are being creative and the rest are just following the rules. Why not make all 10,000 of them everyday innovators? And to be clear, I'm not suggesting irresponsible risk. I'm not suggesting people draw with purple crayons on the wall. But if you tap into the creative capacity of a team, the entire organization flourishes. And we've had the privilege to do that for companies like Cardinal Health and Honda and many others around the world.
So talk about the 5 core mindsets and innovations that you speak about in your while you're on your tours, and so explain a little bit about that to our viewers.
Yeah, so as mentioned, I just completed a new book, and I actually spent over 1,000 hours in research. I dug through academic journals, and we look at neuroscience and fMRI machines, but also really understanding through interviews, how do the most innovative people in all walks of life think and act. And so what you're getting to is these core principles or beliefs that everyday innovators and also celebrity innovators tend to embrace. We talked about a couple of them already, but I'll just share a couple more. One of them is the notion of break it to fix it. So we've all been told that, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. To me, that is terrible advice. Like, why wait till something has critically failed before you get after reinventing it? So it's this proactive notion to examine systems that might be working just fine, deconstruct them, and think about new ways to rebuild them, to upgrade them. It's funny, one thing I've noticed now in 30 years in business is that too often people overestimate the risk of trying something new, but they underestimate the risk of standing still. So this principle, break it to fix it, is a core one. One other one that I'll just share quickly is the notion of reach for weird. Reach for weird. The concept is that when we approach something, we're trying to solve a problem or seize an opportunity, we very quickly gravitate to the tried and true. How have people normally done this? How has it always been done in the past? And my suggestion instead is to dig a little deeper and look for those oddball, misfit ideas, the unorthodox, the surprising, the weird, because those are the ones actually that can make the biggest impact. And so these, again, are just some of the habits and mindsets that people of all walks of life tend to embrace when they bring their creativity forward.
Now, do you think that millennials are having a greater impact embracing this type of mindset because they have nothing to undo? They're just starting out and they're not so fearful of failing. Do you see that as more prevalent? Or is it kind of the, up here versus here, that there are risk takers no matter what level you're at?
Yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily germane to the millennial generation, but yes, earlier people in their career, there's an Eastern philosophy about having your glass empty. In other words, if your cup is full, you can't put anything new in it. And so if our minds are full, we think this is the way you do things, you're unwilling to accept new approaches. People earlier in their career don't have that. They don't have 40 years of thinking this is the way it's supposed to be done. So they do tend to be more open-minded. Mm-hmm. That being said, the beauty of this to me is that, and the research is so clear, as human beings, we're hardwired to be creative. That's our natural state. Now, many of us have sort of been socialized out of it. It's unfortunate because it's often been said that we enter kindergarten with a full set of colorful crayons and graduate high school with a single ballpoint blue pen. So whether you're a millennial or someone later in your career or anywhere in between, we really can reconnect to those creative roots with a little bit of practice and a little bit of a framework to get there.
So basically, from a business perspective, we tend to overestimate the risk of trying something new, which we just touched on. Can you share a case study of a company that was actually stepping out of their comfort zone and did try something new and was super successful at it?
Yeah. One of the people that I interviewed for the book is a guy named Matt Ishbia. Matt was employee number 12 at a small mortgage company. And they weren't even in the top 500 mortgage companies. And they sold like every other mortgage company. They called on customers and like, hey, can I refinance your house? But Matt decided that there was a better approach. And he flipped it upside down. So he decided instead of going after direct consumers, he said, what if we became a wholesale mortgage company? What if we became the back end operation for all the independent mortgage companies out there? So instead of trying to compete with Rocket Mortgage or Wells Fargo, they said, what if we enabled the smaller independent brokers? So we flipped the entire company upside down, took the helm, went for it. Today, the company has almost 7,000 employees. They have had a public offering, and Mr. Matt Ishbia, who's 40 years old, is now worth almost $13 billion. And so he took this small company and he took this flip it upside down approach, the break it to fix it approach, and in turn yielded extraordinary results.
Okay, so when making room for more competitive approaches that you talk about, mainly the business funeral technique, explain this entire approach and what it exactly means. It's kind of the funeral approach during this pandemic. It's kind of, is it something people get a little uncomfortable about?
Well, I certainly don't mean to be macabre, but so fascinating thing. So Ben and Jerry's, the wonderful ice cream maker, they had this ritual. And when a flavor is no longer successful anymore, they bury it. But I mean, they actually literally bury it. They have a physical graveyard at their headquarters, and they bury the thing, and they have a tombstone, and they give the
Positive approach. This is a positive thing then, the one you're
It's a
talking
positive thing. Well, they are letting go of the past, and they're making a celebration about it. In other words, instead of just letting an old product linger and die on its own, they like call the patient, and they recognize, hey, this is okay, this is part of it. So they give it a champagne send-off and talk about the good years. They actually have a graveyard on their website with little tombstones for each flavor. But what this does is it encourages people to explore the new. Forest fires, for example, are very devastating, but they also create opportunity for new growth. And that's kind of what this process is. So instead of just relying on that system or approach that you've used for 30 years, because, hey, that's the way we've always done it. Hey, it may have been optimized 30 years ago, but a lot has changed in 30 years. So the business funeral is a simple technique where you examine what's sort of not working optimally anymore. And instead of trying to rejigger it, you might just say, hey, let's give it a funeral. Let's bring it a cake and light some candles and celebrate its life, but then give ourselves the beauty and privilege of a blank page. There's so much opportunity when we allow ourselves to start fresh. And that's what the business funeral technique is all about.
Now, how should organizations go about seeking the unexpected in order to remain front and center in the minds of their customers?
Well, I'm really into techniques. And so, practical techniques. It's funny, if you think about what's the technology that you and I use typically to bring ideas forward. It's a technology that was invented in 1958 called brainstorming. Well, a lot has changed since 1958. And brainstorming, in fact, is a rather ineffective technology. It tends to bring safe ideas and mediocre ideas, but not bold ones. So over the years, I've built a whole toolkit of many other technologies that I think are better. I call it idea jamming, by the way, instead of brainstorming. But one real quickly to answer your question, how can companies seek the unexpected? It's a technique that I've coined the judo flip. The judo flip. So here's the way it works. Let's say you're trying to better serve customers. So first you take an inventory of how have you always taken on a particular thing in the past? What's the conventional wisdom? What's the industry prevailing approach? Mm-hmm. Then you draw a line down the page, and next to each entry, you just ask yourself, what would it look like if I judo flipped it? In other words, what's the polar opposite? So if normally your retail store has hours that are like banker hours, the judo flip would be 24 hours a day. If normally you sell everything at the cheapest price, the judo flip would be, what would it look like if we became the most expensive? And so it's not necessarily agreeing to do any of these things. It's challenging yourself to be oppositional to conventional wisdom. And that judo flip approach can actually really open up some fresh possibilities. Not that those are final work products. They may need some revision, but at least it opens you up to fresh possibility.
So do you have any thoughts or advice about trying to thrive during the pandemic? And can you possibly share a positive outcome of a company winning in this market and this environment?
Sure. So in the pandemic, God willing and such, like it will be short term. I mean, 10 years from now, we'll look back at it. We won't still be in it. So there are certainly companies that have made money and succeeded during the pandemic. One, funny enough, my brother invested in a little company called Screencastify, and they do distance learning for education. So, in our current environment, clearly that company has accelerated in a dramatic way. And so if you happen to be in like the PPE business, like you've had a good run. But I think that for the broader audience, for most of us, rather than trying to pinpoint a short-term opportunity, I think what the pandemic has done positively, and obviously there's lots of negatives, but the positive, the world is hitting a giant reset button. Mm-hmm. And when that reset button has been hit, our patterns have been broken. The way we work, the way we interact, the way we hang out with our family even. And so when patterns are broken, there's a quote that new worlds emerge, which means that customer loyalties to doing things in a certain way have been disrupted. And the way that we engage with partners and vendors and suppliers, it's all changed, which really that is sort of like the forest fire that we described earlier. It's giving us a chance to replant and build anew. And so because of this giant reset, I think there's a real opportunity for startups and smaller companies and challenger brands to get in there and seize ground that before was almost insurmountable.
So your latest book, Big Little Breakthroughs, is coming out soon. So why don't you give us a brief overview of what makes this book stand out from this crowded business field?
Yeah, so it's called Big Little Breakthroughs, How Small Everyday Innovations Drive Oversized Results. And it really does, well, I guess it judo flips things around a bit, because most people think of innovation as a swing for the fences, bet the whole company, and if it's not $1 billion idea, it doesn't count. And this is exactly the opposite. It helps ordinary people in ordinary jobs and such cultivate small little daily breakthroughs. In other words, micro innovations. That is a totally different approach to innovation. First of all, it's accessible to everybody. In other words, it's not the good old boy club. You don't have to be wearing a hoodie or a lab coat to be innovative. This is a book for everybody. Second of all, when you do small little creative approaches, it's way less risky and scary. So if you screw something up, it doesn't end your career. Next, those big little breakthroughs add up to big stuff. In fact, there was a Harvard study that came out recently that said 72% of the US gross domestic product doesn't come from those sexy, attention-grabbing big ideas. It comes from the little ones. And then finally, when you're doing lots of high volume of these little teeny micro innovations, you build skill. And so in other words, you become better. You're developing your creativity muscle. So it's a really fresh approach for everyday people to, again, become everyday innovators.
Now, who was your target audience when you were writing this book?
You know, it's pretty wide. So it's obviously for the CEO of a big company, sure, but it's also for the middle manager, and it's for the up and coming high potential person. But it's also for the dentist who wants to build their dental practice better. It's for the trial lawyer that wants to have better results in front of a jury. So if you think about, all of us have desires, outcomes that we're craving. We're looking to gain an edge in things that are important to us. Creativity is just a tool that can be harnessed to drive those desired outcomes. So if your desired outcome is a health outcome, you could apply big little breakthroughs to that. If your desired outcome is a sales professional, is to close more deals, you can apply big little breakthroughs to that. So it really is sort of a universal approach to cultivating this power that we all have but don't all use of creativity to drive specific and tangible results.
So in your book, you do talk a lot about how simple, ordinary ideas can actually fuel extraordinary ideas. Just tell us a little bit more about this mindset, and how can people make that become part of their daily thinking? Is there exercises or anything you can do to recommend to them to keep it going?
Yeah, for sure. So in the book, I cover all kinds of fascinating stories. Here's what, by the way, there's no story about Netflix or Amazon or Apple. Of course, those are innovative companies, but we already know that. So we cover these surprising, unexpected stories of amazing people, like normal people that have done crazy cool stuff with everyday innovation. And so really, instead of you look at Elon Musk, you're like, well, that's cool for him, but that doesn't apply to me. This is the opposite. It's like, yeah, this is within my grasp. And so you actually asked two questions. One is an example of a big little breakthrough. Dozens and dozens and dozens of them in the book, but one that just comes to mind. In London, it turns out that cigarette litter is a really big problem, just like it is in New York City. And people have tried doing all these things, shaming smokers into compliance. Nothing really works. And it's terrible for the environment. It costs a bunch of money to try to clean up, and it's bad for small children or animals that could ingest them. Just bad. So in London, I interviewed a guy named Trewin Restorick. And Trewin is not a celebrity. He's not a billionaire. He's like a normal dude. He has wrinkly khaki pants and 10-year-old loafers. But he had an idea, a big little breakthrough. He created something called the ballot bin. So imagine you and I walked out of a pub in London and we were about to throw our cigarette butts on the ground. But instead you see this bright yellow thing glowing off in the distance, and you're drawn to it. And what a ballot bin is, it's a metal container mounted at eye level with a glass front. There's a two-part question at the top, like, which is your favorite food, pizza or hamburgers? And so there's a little divider behind it. And so you basically vote with your butts. If you like pizza, you put your cigarette butt where it says pizza, and the butts fall on top of the other butts. It's almost like a live bar chart to see which one of these two is winning. And so this is a simple, low-tech, didn't take a PhD, didn't require $1 billion of capital, but he reduced cigarette litter by 80%.
That's amazing.
He went on to start a company. He's got these now in 27 countries around the world. He's making a real environmental impact, not because he had some wizard-like creativity, it's because he's a normal dude that decided to be creative. And that, to me, the book is full of stories like that. Real quickly, though, you answered what can people do? I do cover the habits, a lot of them. We look at the habits of Lady Gaga and Lin-Manuel Miranda and Steven Spielberg and the guys who write South Park. And we really break it down into scientific, what can you do every day to cultivate this skill? The good news is that creativity is like your weight, not your height. So I'm pretty short. I'm not going to grow a foot no matter how hard I try. But my weight I can control based on diet, nutrition, exercise, etc. Creativity is exactly the same. You can control, you can expand your creativity. So the book covers very specific tactical things that people can do 5 minutes a day to actually build the skills, build the creativity muscles.
So how important is it for companies to build a culture of innovation?
Well, I'm, of course, a little biased here, but I believe it's critically important. Think about this. Many of the advantages that organizations had in the past have now become outsourced or automated. So you say, well, how can we really thrive as an organization in a fist-fighting, difficult, competitive world, in a world that's moving at a dizzying speed with increasing complexity and new technology? And many of the obvious ways to compete have already been done. Like that's just the ante to play to now have good service or to have a decent product at a decent price. So when we're looking to win, and often we win in the margins, to me, creativity is one of the most important natural resources that we can cultivate. By the way, it's free, it's renewable, it doesn't hurt the environment. But when we look at our organization as a team of these creative people, of artists really, and we don't tap it, what a shame. That'd be like not tapping into another type of resource that we have, maybe not tapping into money or real estate or equipment. That is a technology that's laying dormant. And as leaders, as they can bring that to the surface and deploy it, it truly becomes a sustainable competitive advantage. So I really don't know how a leader can't prioritize this. Mm-hmm. Just incidentally, the World Economic Forum recently released a study, the Future of Jobs report. They asked CEOs around the world what are the most important skills, job skills needed just 5 years from now. And actually 4 of the top 5 that they listed around the world all tie to creativity, like in creative thinking and problem solving and inventiveness and originality. So it's not just my opinion, that's where the world is headed. In other words, the hard skills of the past are now automated, and it's the soft skills, the creative skills that are desperately needed in order to win in these competitive times.
So what role, if any, did the pandemic play in writing your book?
Well, for me personally, it actually gave me a much more time. So I'm very proud of this work. I look at it as a piece of art. It's not Hemingway or anything, but I am proud of it. Again, I spent over 1,000 hours in the research here. So I think the book is better as a result of the pandemic. But also because the world, as mentioned, is hitting this giant reset button, I got to really explore people's, see how they're accelerating their creativity. In other words, many people said, I need to do this someday. And the pandemic created the day. And I got to see how sometimes they always say, necessity is the mother of invention. Well, because the world is in the middle of so much turmoil, that was actually the necessity that drove the creativity, much of which I covered in the book.
And finally, what do you hope readers take away from your book?
First thing I hope they take away is that they are creative, because we all are. It's not 1 out of 1,000 of us are creative and the rest of us have to suffer. All of us, truly all of us, are hardwired to be creative in our own ways. So I hope they get that. I hope that they also feel that, yeah, I got this. Like it's a toolkit. It's a systematic approach to become an everyday innovator. So it's not, again, like, oh, there's Mark Zuckerberg, I could never do that. It's like, you know what? I can do this. Mm-hmm. So it should be uplifting and empowering. It's a fun read. There's lots of stories and humor and such. But I hope that they walk away, again, with a specific and tactical approach to harness and build and ultimately deploy their creativity to drive the outcomes that they care the most about.
Great. Thank you so much, Josh. It was a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you. My pleasure as well.
And that's it for this edition of Sarder TV. We hope you enjoyed and learned something new today. Until next time, I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick. Thanks for watching.